With all the consumer and marketing research data out there, what should brands focus on to build brand equity and consumer loyalty? In this episode, seasoned marketing and advertising executive and the CEO of Kantar South Africa, Ivan Moroke, joins me to share some of the trends that brands and agencies should apply their minds to.
Companies and the brands that are strong on different, like your Woolworths, like your F&B, which is, as I said, the number one on the most valuable brand this year. Nando's, because of the communication, they reap the rewards. So difference is one of the most important things that any brand can do.
We also delve into how marketers can prove the value of brand building in a tough economy.
The key trend that needs to do is for marketeers to absolutely show how that brand equity ultimately contributes to the bottom line.
To get insights on building resilient brands in a tough economy, keep listening. If you haven't subscribed to The Lead Creative yet, please do. It really helps us to bring more inspiring guests. Welcome to the Lead Creative Podcast, where we talk to creative industry leaders, influencers, and brands. We discuss the strategies that influence brand thinking and shape industries. Thought leaders and heads of agencies let us in on some of their thinking and insights. I'm your host, Mongezi Mtati. Enjoy the show, and please share and subscribe. Ivan, thank you so much for making time to join us on The Lead Creative. Yeah, what an honor to have you on the show. I mean, I've been looking forward to talking to you because your name actually keeps coming up quite a lot when I talk to people in the industry. There was a conference recently. So yeah, this is really exciting for me. And just to start us off, I mean, you've been in marketing for a long time. Can you paint us a picture of how marketing has changed in your view between the time you started and today?
Well, at the risk of simplifying it a bit, it used to be quite simple. Yeah, you've got something you want to sell, you put it out there, and especially if it's unique, you tell people about it and people buy it.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, I mean, that's being quite simplistic, but it was really about a push out strategy that we used to do. And I think the more things change, including parity with products, with services, you've got to now have to do beyond just what the product and its intrinsic and extrinsic benefits. And lately, there are so many other things that have influenced marketing, including data now. I think there is so much data in terms of making decisions that should be based on data and not on gut feel. Mm-hmm. There's an issue of sustainability that has come up, how tech and digital has impacted consumer behavior.
Sure.
And if it has impacted consumer behavior, brands have had to adapt to it. And there's also competition, which sometimes you might not even see where it's coming from, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Where barriers to entry in different categories are a bit low, so you never know who's going to come in. And the lines are blurring between different sectors and all that. So it's quite a lot. And the big thing as well, which I suppose we'll touch on it later, is the demand of business for marketing to be far much more commercially responsible. Mm-hmm. The ROI. That's the single biggest debate I think marketeers now are faced with, to say it's not enough to say we are building the brand building awareness. Like, how does it translate to sales? So there's quite a lot where your typical CMO has got to deal with that, like in the past. Good product, good communication, that is to guarantee success in the past.
You mentioned something about this reliance on data that I was going to ask a bit later on, but I might as well ask it now. This reliance on data versus gut feel. What are it's said that data helps a lot with the creative process, with enabling us to get to an insight quicker. In some ways, though, when you look at the communication, when you look at the advertising that we are served as customers, even as marketers, you realize that there was a huge reliance on the data rather than the insights. What are some of the ways to sort of to curb this or to change it or to improve it for brands and agencies?
There's a simple way to look at it, really. If you just a simple continuum: data, insight, and strategy and execution. It's as simple as that. It's not complicated.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, sometimes as marketeers, we tend to complicate stuff unnecessarily.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why we do that, but I digress. I think data, how on earth anybody, if you have an option of making any decision in life, professionally, personally, once you have the data, why wouldn't you use that? I mean, why wouldn't you consider that data? It sounds, at best, it sounds arrogant, right? To be spending money and doing things while data is available, you are not using it. However,
absolutely,
you are right. If you think just taking that data and everything that is supposed, data is an input to insights, because even data, there's a saying that the world is data rich, but insight poor. So you have to take that data so that you can come up with human insights that can connect the brand with that. But even that insight itself is not an end in itself, because we do not do insights to write academic papers, right?
Yes.
I mean, insight is only insight if it's a foundation for growth, for strategy, for selling, for creating things. So once that insight is done, then there should be an inspiration for these crazy people who are amazing called creatives, where they can take that insight. Because even if you have to do communication, translating just that insight directly, that might not be enough, right? That's why you need that magic. It's the old thing. Nothing's new under the sun in terms of logic means magic. Really, it's as straightforward as that. So you need the data to inform the insights, and then the insights to be a foundation for growth and for creative, for impact, for people who are far much more creative than me. If I had to do, I might be able to distill insights, but the last thing a brand needs is work, that creative work, maybe in comms, in ad, that is being done by me. No, that's the worst thing. It will be right, but it might not be impactful, and that's why you've got to collaborate with people who are more talented in terms of that creativity.
Yeah. I'm just noting that I think that the reliance on data in a way that it looks like the insight element is missing now because we've got so much data. That's I think that's kind of one of the things that when you look at information or when you look at ads or brand communication that is served to us as customers, some brands try to personalize it. And I want to talk about this area of personalization. Some brands try to personalize it, but you can tell that, oh, I was, searching for this car and now I'm being served these things. I've already bought this product. So that's a reliance on data rather than the insights that, okay, because I bought this, I might also be looking for that and that and that. And we've got all this data available. So are we relying more on data because we've got it available and almost translating that data or at least using that data as insight without getting to the actual insights?
Yeah, and to be fair, I think things have shifted. Do you remember about 5 years ago when everybody was big data, but things progress, right? Because at the time it was like we generate, as agencies generate data, consumers generate data, clients themselves in the interaction with their customer generate data. So I can understand why the obsession about data. But once things have matured to say, is there so what? The data is just, it tells you the what are things. And it doesn't matter how you get the data, whether qualitatively or quantitatively, it doesn't matter. Data is data.
Yes.
And we've always used data, to be honest. It's just the difference of big data, where is so much generation. Yeah. But what hasn't changed is data has to be interpreted to say, what is the insight? And the beauty about the insights, when you find the insights, you'll know. It's not data. You'll find out that going through that, and normally insights, you find it by when you triangulate different data points, right? And that's the beauty about insight, because that magic comes through because like, for example, you cannot just base your insight in terms of maybe quantitative data or research that has been done, because there might be a lot of claiming from consumers when you ask them questions. But imagine if you take that and look at their behavior. I mean, surely
Yes.
common sense tells you that's far much more powerful than just looking at their behavior only to get insights,
True.
or just
True.
looking at what they say to look at it, or just observations or social listening. It's not. And the creativity in strategy, that's where it comes in, right? Is how do I take all these different data about the same consumer and come up with something that gives you that aha moment. I would not have figured it out if I had not overlaid all these different data. So
All these things.
it's less
Yeah.
about the data. It's more about what you do with the data to come with an insight that you can brief. And even their own insights is how you brief a person who's supposed to execute on it, right? I mean, I've worked in advertising before, and I knew about the one page that you must give somebody. And sometimes researchers and strategists, sometimes we can be a bit too obsessed with the tons and tons of information, while the creative to say, can you give me one page and tell me what to do? I'll do the magic.
Yeah.
And distillation of that's a craft and a skill in itself.
Over the years, of course, you've been involved in the industry, in various parts of the industry. And this question is probably not an easy one to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Why
What
ask it?
trends? No, because
You have
because
not to
because
answer it.
I think the I think the magic is in finding a way to answer this question, because you are looking at a lot. So what trends have you noticed over the past few years that will affect brands going forward if they don't apply their minds to them? Seeing as, it's the start of a new year, it's there's so much data and so many things. We've been talking about data quite a bit,
Yeah.
but what are some of these trends that brands should apply their minds to, and if not, they might become irrelevant?
Well, one of the big ones, and the thing is both internally and externally. Internally, I think I've alluded to it before, where marketeers now are being called to show ROI, right? And the problem with that conversation has been, unfortunately, people who are not marketeers, and rightfully so, the financial guys in a company might be looking at more of performance measures, metrics. They'll be interested in those to say the sales, okay? Especially on digital, let's do digital because it can lead to sale, and where they might have to neglect issues of the brand. The issue is not either or. And I think that's what the problem is. It's like we have these zero-sum games to say, is it sales or is it brand equity? It's both, because what brand equity does, it gives you a predisposition even over a long time of the very same sales you are looking for, right? While just doing some high performance marketing, yeah, you might score in the short term. The problem is, as I mentioned before, where there's so much similarities in terms of the sector that you might in, is when that brand, that emotional connection makes a difference. So, but the key trend that needs to do is for marketeers to absolutely show how that brand equity ultimately contributes to the bottom line. There's one. I think marketers have got to be far much more commercially sourced in terms of showing the impact of brand building and with sales. That's one of them. The other issue is the issue of value. And especially if you consider, worldwide, in terms of the world is in a flux economically, and even worse, in SA is tough because, is the macro world pressures, and then you have the South African pressures itself, and then you've got company pressures and brand pressures. So we are in it. So value becomes extremely important. And I'm consciously saying value, not cheap. So you really have got to show your brand. If you're going to be investing in a brand, you have to give people a reason to believe that they are willing to pay a bit more premium for your brand, even in these tough times, because it's worth it. So value becomes quite important. The other one is sustainability. It's amazing how just about 3 or 4 years ago, where sustainability used to be a nice to have, right? Where it used to be maybe CSIR in companies, and it might actually be house in corp rep, not necessarily in brand, but more and more brands have woken up thanks to the millennials who have shown that, yeah, over and above the intrinsic and extrinsic benefits I get from a product, but I'm also making brand choices based on your sustainability agenda, right? So, and that's exciting in terms of their choice, sustainability and brand becomes one. And of course, tech, including AI, now is, I mean, everybody's talking about AI and its impact on marketing going forward. Whether it's going to, it's like a friend in me. I mean, there's many people who take it as a friend, as many who take it as an enemy. So those are the couple of things that you have to keep in mind, and those are the big trends that are going to impact, I think, going forward.
If you're enjoying The Lead Creative, please share this episode with your network and hit follow or subscribe. Enjoy the show. On the subject of ROI or proving value as marketers, one of the issues that you've picked up on is obviously the economic pressures that consumers and brands are faced with. How do marketers then, in this time with so much riding on whether marketing is providing value for the business or not, what are some of the measurable things or some of the things that marketers can say, marketers can prove to brands as points of value in these times when brands are so facing such strain financially?
Yeah, that's a good question. And fortunately, we've got such empirical evidence about the power of brand building. And if you invest in your brand, what is even more important is how it can. It has been proven with scientific evidence with our BrandZ, and I'll talk a bit about what BrandZ is about, which shows without a share of doubt that it has been recorded across the globe in all stock markets that there's a direct correlation with the power of brand equity and it goes up and its share value. But also what is important is also how it is able to absorb downturns. Brands that are tough, that are stronger and have got high equity, they can, when there is headwinds coming in, they can, even if they go down less than the brands with weaker brands. So there's empirical evidence that shows that. And BrandZ is exactly what it does. And so in a nutshell, what BrandZ does, I think Kantar BrandZ is, and we had it this year as well. It's been, I think our fourth year in South Africa where we have BrandZ, the top 30 most valuable brands. At the core of what it is, it combines the capitalization value of a brand. It allocates it to that, plus the brand contribution, which is how customers rate that brand, and then they combine it and it gives a value. And it's this year. So, and every year once we publish it, we are one of the few countries around Kantar that do have the local brand values. And this year the number one was F&B. And every time we come up with some of the key highlights that we are seeing across the brand evaluation. And as I said, fortunately, there's enough evidence to show that you don't even have to guess, or especially since it starts insights, to show what I've been saying before, the direct correlation between brand and the bottom line. That is key. And I think it goes back to marketeers being able with confidence to have those kind of conversations about, and not being shy to talk about ROI, right? And sometimes, as I said before, I find marketers might be a bit more comfortable to talk about the brand ROIs, or even creativity and comms, but not comfortable to be talking about the commercial contributions of those brands, I think, to the bottom line.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the top 30, at least on the South African front, of BrandZ, because I'm looking at the infographic of the top 100, and one of the things that struck me, of course, which would make sense, is that the top 100 is global brands that we sort of a lot of us grew up on and grew up loving, with some exceptions here and there, like Netflix, and all of that, which are newer brands in comparison to some of the bigger ones that are here. What are some of the similarities that you're seeing on a global front versus a local front in terms of the most valuable brands and brands with the most equity?
So there's a model that we use is called MDF. So what it does, so the combination of the brand equity is based on three important things. One is salience, right? And salience is how well known. And maybe the closest thing that people might think about is awareness, but it's more than awareness. So salience is like how quickly and easily a brand comes to mind when making a purchase, right? So it's quite important to build that. The other one is meaningful. So it's the foundation of the brand, and it's like how well does it meet the consumer needs, both on a functional and emotional level, right? So that's the second part. The third part of it is different, and difference is the extent to which brands are seen to offer something that others don't offer, and it might be real, it might be perceived, right? And the difference might be functional, or it might be emotional, right? And what is absolutely across different markets that shows the impact of difference. Silence is important, meaningful is different. That's good. And even in SA, all the top brands, they show they are strong in meaningful and silence. But without doubt, across the world, it shows the importance of difference. And think about it. And as I said before, in a era where it is so where there's so much parity, whether in different sectors and all, it's actually by intuition it's not surprising about how important difference is. And may I say that in SA we trend a bit lower than in other markets when it comes to difference. We are quite strong on meaningful. So even all our comms and all, they are fantastic in doing salience and doing meaningful, but we are a bit weak on difference. And the companies and the brands that are strong on difference, like your Woolworths, like your F&B, which is, as I said, the number one on the most valuable brand this year. Nando's, because of the communication, they reap the rewards. So difference is one of the most important things that any brand can do.
Interesting. And in terms of this salience, is it something that, of course, salience would be said that takes a long time to build. There are brands that have been that are new, that have already got to that point. And I can't think of South African ones necessarily, but ChatGPT, Netflix. How long? I mean, I know there's no specific time, but how long does it take? Is it a matter of time that you build salience, or is it a matter of how the consumer believes you've built it with them?
Well, it's a good question, and the answer is how long is a piece of string. But it's interesting what you're saying about newer brands, because you are right. I mean, if you are a new brand, you are up against like the brands in their sector that might have been there for a long time, and they come to mind quite quickly. But you know what helps you in terms of being new? Think about the brands that you've mentioned.
Yes.
What made, when you say ChatGPT, when you said Netflix, you know what made it be so quick, even in coming to mind, even if they are new and they might be sort of like, is there a difference?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's like challenger brands, right? Mm-hmm. If you are challenger brands, you cannot fight as a challenger brand. I call it the David Goliath principle. You cannot find Goliath with the strength that they have. What seemingly is small with you, but you are more agile, right? You must use that, I think, to fight against something that, because of their size, they are something that they might not be able to do. But you being smaller, you're a bit far more nimble and agile. So that difference that's how powerful it is that difference can allow you to really be well known, be meaningful and salient. However, as I said before, you really, in this era of parity. You have to really do something that does come across as quite different. And
unique.
I
Yeah.
must say, that's
Yeah.
why communication sometimes is powerful, because the difference might not necessarily be intrinsic. It might actually even be perceived. And that's where the power of marketing comes through.
So, a lot has been happening in the social media space over the past, call it, year or so, and a lot of it
Yeah.
happening on X, where brands have had concerns about brand safety. Some brands supposedly or having said to have left X, pulled their budgets, and all of that. What are some of the global and local implications of this?
Yeah, the X thing is quite the X thing is quite interesting, because even just from a basic rebranding perspective, it seems like it was going against any conventional wisdom. But well, the owner is not necessarily renowned for being conventional, right? Funny enough, you asked about X, because actually in the BrandZ work that we did, we actually measure those three things on the brand X, since it moved, I think, from Twitter to X. And also remember, it wasn't just, I think, about the rebranding. It was also about all the other controversies that were surrounding it. And remember, with those three things that I mentioned, meaningful, different, and salient, you know what was interesting was, in terms of meaningful and salient, they went down since all the controversies and the rebranding. But one thing that has stayed strong has been difference. So whatever people might be, and to be honest, even consumers have said the rebranding has impacted the predisposition and their claim use of the brand, to say, the awareness went, it dropped significantly. I think it was from 96% at the time to about 83%, 22 versus 23. And even consideration and claimed usage declined for about 10%. However, the difference still stayed. We showed you that it's going to be a long time up until we see a fundamental shift in terms of how consumers, at least, not brands. I mean, brands I know have been living in droves from being on X, but in terms of consumers, it's so different. And I think consumers cannot see something that is an alternative to it among all the social media platforms. And they say different things. So at least it's different up until something as strong or different comes along. I personally, I think it's going to be there. It's going to be there for a while. I think they might suffer, which they are suffering from the brands themselves playing it safe and not wanting to be associated with it. But from an end user consumer perspective, I think X is going to be here for a
Around
while.
for a while.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Interesting,
yeah.
interesting. Yeah, and I'm still seeing some brands on the platform, and I think, what's your opinion on a platform that's in some ways, because brands cite negativity and negative things that are happening on X as their reason for leaving, right? What are some of the sort of dangers, I suppose, or downsides of being a brand that stays when others are leaving, citing negative things happening on the platform?
It's quite an important question, because it's a question I've actually even asked myself, not even just from being in the industry, but being a consumer myself, to say, do you do that really, or do you can you disassociate between a platform and that brand? I might not like the platform, but I'm not necessarily judging that brand by being on that platform. I don't know, to be honest. It's just, and that's a question I ask myself sometimes, right? I can understand why some brands might be living in droves, and some might be even for social sustainability reasons, or some thinking that association might harm it. And the ones who are staying, they've just have been saying, like, consumers can tell a difference, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Consumers can tell a difference between what we as a brand and a platform, and consumers can make a distinction. I don't know, but sometimes I feel I might even default to that, to say, consumers are smart, right? I don't think they are going to, if you're a brand, you're advertising on that. It must be for, unless it's for all the other reasons that you might be having. But to say consumers are going to associate that platform with your ads, I suppose I can pose the same thing about some channels, right?
Yes.
Different media channels, whether local or international, people still do advertise on them too. Consumer says, because you're advertising on this channel, I'm
I won't
not
buy your
going
brand. I won't buy
to
your
follow you.
products. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there should be as much for or against the argument. Me as a person, does it impact me? No, do I judge the brands that I follow that I like harshly because they're on there? Not really, but I'm a sample of one.
Yeah. Just going back to the BrandZ report and some of the insights that you mentioned there, and this and the measurements that you use, they're meaningful, salient, and different. How do brands, how do, I suppose, local brands, first of all, and brands that don't have a global footprint, brands that are smaller than, the top ones that you've mentioned, like F&B and Nando's,
Yeah.
apply some of these findings in their strategy?
Oh, and by the way, here's something you must keep in mind about BrandZ. One of the things about BrandZ, not the global one, right? The South African most valuable brand, that the one that F&B is number one on. The key thing, they have to be locally born brands. So the South African one does not have any international brand at all. All of them are local brands. That's quite important. And sometimes we always get a funny question about it's about black label, because people own it so much, they always assume it is a South African brand. But when you trace its roots, it's actually a Canadian brand. So they are all local. They are all local. And if you think about it, they are made. You remember I said that is made of two things, right? It's in terms of the brand. Is the valuation is made up of the brand contribution, which is far much more from the desire that consumers feel about that brand, and you multiply it by the market capitalization that has been allocated to that brand, and then you get the value. Now, obviously, there will be some brands that their market cap will always be huge, like financial services and telcos, and that's why you find that they normally feature so high. By their nature, that part of the evaluation is significant, right? But we have seen some brands that they might not have that, but in terms of their brand contribution, they might even challenge, I think, the bigger brands which are at the top because of their market capitalization. So again, showing you that the brand contribution have got a fundamental impact on brand equity, which is a value that is even on the balance sheet. I mean, when companies are being evaluated anyway. So there is a direct relationship to building the brand and how and its impact on the bottom line or on shareholder value. So you are right to say, even if you might not be as big, but you are smaller. But I think in brand building, there's where things like differentiation that we are talking about becomes quite important, where you can absolutely, I think, punch way above your weight.
If you're enjoying The Lead Creative, please share this episode with your network and hit follow or subscribe. Enjoy the show. Considering the cultural diversity in Africa, how should global brands adapt their strategies for local markets without losing their global identity, without losing the things that we love about them at a global level, but being locally relevant still?
Yeah, that's an important question, because, and especially sometimes even within the continent, doing well the continent, you always get the popular question that, yeah, but Africa is not a country,
Absolutely.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, but I always say it might not be a country, but sometimes it is like a country. And the reason why I say that is what connects the continent is far much more stronger and cuts across than what makes it different. So the same thing is on global. To your question about global brands, What connects human beings, not just even Africa, is human insights, right? So a global brand is based on the very similar things, right? It doesn't matter where you are across the world, continent, or where you are. There are some things that, and that's where great insights and great brands are built on, is on that human truth, right? So it should not be, so the core of that brand should be on that level. However, you absolutely, in terms of activation and articulating it, you've got to think of local nuances. Of course, you've got to do it. And that's where even your marketing mix might be different, right? I think if you're going to be doing like a thematic big brand ad, obviously not just for efficiencies, but for connections, you'd want to do that big thematic ads that can talk as much as he's talking to Lagos, as he's talking to Moroke, as he's talking to Soweto, as he's talking to Sao Paulo. It's like, and you see it quite well in terms of, if you think about some of the alcohol brands, does it matter? I mean, if you see an ad and it's an amazing thematic ad about a brand that everybody loves. But obviously, if you're going to be doing something like to have, maybe you're doing some bespoke activation in a country and all that, of course, you've got to consider the nuances in that country. Again, is not all, right? So, because it doesn't make sense to be trying to build a Pan-African brand, and then you've got to do campaigns that are specific to each of those markets if you are a Pan-African brand. But just be clear that, when you localize it is in terms of on the ground. And sometimes as well, you have to think about, if you're doing a global thing of, even at a global level, articulation, you must be careful. Though the human truth might be the same, but some things might be offensive to other markets. It's logic. It's just common sense. As I said before, sometimes I think we complicate things unnecessarily.
Yeah. You mentioned AI a bit earlier on when we started talking. How is AI and machine learning transforming the space of market and consumer research? And what are some of the implications that you're seeing as a result? Like, how has it changed things, or haven't you not seen a change so far?
All I can say is we haven't seen nothing yet in terms of the power of what AI can do, and just broadly in marketing. But your question about in terms of research is truly amazing. Like, for example, there is something on optimization of media, right? In optimizing media, you might be looking at things from what has happened. How have you spent your budget across different media, like mixed media modeling? And then what are the learnings you can do? What we have and we can see is with AI, it can absolutely even be able to generate with low margin in terms of going forward what you should be doing. And that's because of AI. And that can shows you, if you invest this, if you mix this like this, what you might be getting in terms of the impact on business, which is absolutely amazing, which is incredible. So, and also in terms of AI and its efficiencies, right? Because what it does, you remember in research, it goes back to what we were talking about. It's less about the data, but about the insights. And if AI can make sure that the people that you have, they spend more time in terms of doing those insights and unpacking them, instead of having to be doing that compilation of the data and work that could be done faster and cheaper and more efficient. So you liberate people to be spending time on things that they love doing anyway. Broadly speaking, marketing, I think the biggest issue is, so in research is actually quite simple. There's no issue. I think where I find where is more of a frenemy is on the com side, right? Where there are most obvious things, and there is some merit in it to say this thing is going to impact people's livelihood and jobs, right? And I think there is that potential, because some of the things that you are seeing, that I've seen coming out even out of Ken, I mean, they were not quite a lot, but where you can see some things where AI has been applied, it's been amazing. And sometimes you could see that And even socially, how people are playing around with AI and producing some incredible, amazing thing at a half of the fraction and so faster. Of course, the crafts people are going to be impacted. However, I think it can be used to enhance creativity, right? It can be, and it can be even used to enhance strategy. It cannot replace it, but it can enhance it. And yes, might there be some jobs that might be in trouble? I guess so, but will there be new jobs that are created because of it? Just like any other advancement that has happened in the history of mankind, as much as there have been jobs that have been impacted by tech advancement, there are new industries that came through. So for me, I think from a creative side, we have not seen yet the power. I mean, there were some couple of, I'm trying to think of the brand, what it was. I think it was a Coke ad where they use AI to absolutely do the most amazing creative piece of work, where I think was this guy in an art gallery and how the different arts were coming to life. You could see that it was a combination of man and a machine coming together. So everything at the end, I suppose it comes to end instead of either or.
Yeah, I think speaking of Coca-Cola and AI, I saw something in a store that I was in a couple of days ago where they were advertising a Coke that's made by AI. So, and they're calling it a taste of the future or something like that. So, those are
Yeah.
very many of the interesting things, as you point out, that we haven't explored in terms of AI or that we haven't yet seen. What strategies should brands adopt to ensure resilience and maintain customer loyalty and trust in these times of economic downturns, this cost of living crisis that we're living in? What should brands be doing? What should they focus on in their strategies at this time?
Value, value, and value. It is what it comes down to, especially if you combine if you combine brand equity and you combine, which is a truly fundamental tool of growth, and you combine it with the kind of macro environment that we are in, it does come to value, right? Because there's still a human thing. Brands, what they do, they connect with people at a heart and mind level. And as long as it makes sense about, people are prepared to even pay a little bit extra for you to even charge a bit of a premium, but it must make sense, right? And remember, when you say value, it's not just functional value, right? Sometimes it's emotional value, especially in these times where things are so hard. The lipstick index that used to be done in 2008, when there was the global downturn, where they were saying people are willing to spend on a small luxury because things are so bad, right? So even in these times in SA, there are some things, as long as it's worth it, someone can see why they have to spend on that. They might cut down on the big ticket items and really be in tight, but in terms of everyday things that they might want to do, they might be willing to spend a bit far much more on something that doesn't just give them. Rationally, it makes sense, but it leaves the spirit and it makes sense, and they can feel that it is, because you're still thinking, people might not have money, but you're still speaking about human beings who connects with brands on an emotional level as much as they do it in an intrinsic. So it is value, and value can come in different ways. It might be how you build your brand. It might be an experience, right, that you do. If you're a brand and you create an experience, it might even mean collaboration that you are having. I mean, like, for example, who would have thought? I mean, if you look at loyalty programs and loyalty cards, who would have thought some years ago about some of the most unlikely collaborations that now we are so used to it. And it's not even surprising when you fill in at the garage and they ask you for a store card and all this stuff. So all of these are value, adding value to your life in different ways. And as I said, it covers so many ways about adding value. And value talks to anybody. It doesn't matter what level of income are you in. Even somebody who has got money, their criteria might be different, but nobody wants to be taken for a ride, right? Even if you are rich,
Sure.
It's like I might be buying a very high-end, very expensive sports car, but there's a value that I'm attaching what I'm paying and for what I'm getting. It might be emotional what I'm getting. Hey, it doesn't have to be one-dimensional.
Yeah, yeah.
What have you? Are you? I mean, you
So
are lucky
when we
if you're about
get
to invest in a very expensive set of wheels.
no, 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 absolutely, 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 absolutely not. No. So when data, when we've spoken about data, and when data works,
Yeah.
brands are able to to personalize their messaging, and they're able to reach the consumer in ways that are valuable to the consumer. I mean, you've mentioned value just now. What are some of the strategies, or at least an idea or two, that kind of come to mind where brands can personalize their message without it feeling as though they're infringing on the privacy of the consumer?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, consumers are protected with all the data protection that you get across the world. And that's always a delicate balance in terms of feeling that and you feel it, you, let alone you searching something, you are having a conversation. I mean, doesn't it scare you when you're having a conversation and then things start popping up,
Start
right?
popping up, yeah, yeah.
And that's a double-edged sword. So, and that's a delicate one, to be honest. I think is when, and it's how you do it, right? Like, for example, if you're going to be using digital to say, I'm offering you something that will enhance your search or whatever, I think consumers can be a bit forgiving in terms of that. But when they feel that information you got in a way that I'm not comfortable with it, like as I said, our devices listening to us, that's where it really, it goes, it really, it does far much more harm than good. I mean, consumers are always willing to opt in into something that makes their life easier. It's just when that information, it sounds like we got it in a bit of an underhand ways. That's where you are really, I think, skating on thin ice in terms of that. But at the same time, I think consumers appreciate anything that takes out the friction in their world, as long as they feel like the they are part of,
It's
they are
for their
opting
benefit,
in, they
yeah.
are part of it, they are doing that with you to make their life easier. I think it's okay. It's just when it seems like it's been a bit underhanded.
So, Ivan, we have a tradition on the show where we ask our guests a question for someone, or at least around, in and around someone's work who they follow. And really, the question is that if you could ask any living person about
You,
their
you, you
unique
can't ask
take.
me that question because you've used it before. You started off that way. So I think your quota is out
No, I
about
have to. I have to ask this question because I'd love to know who you would ask the question. So I have to ask it. And really, the question
yeah.
is, if you could ask any living person about their unique take on marketing, creativity, or their creative approach to work or life, who would that person be, and what's the question that you would ask them?
Yeah, that's yeah. The only trick thing is alive.
I'm sure there are many.
I've got a couple who have passed on, but that's yeah. You know, I suppose it would be um, the person um, who's got bad designs of doing rockets going up, but he's quite successful. Jeff Bezos, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's something about which I find extraordinary about Jeff Bezos. For whatever you might think about him, he's successful in what he does, and it seems like how he does stuff is how he simplifies. I mean, one of the most important clips I've seen is about him talking about being customer obsessed. And there are many of us who say this kind of things, but do not actually live by it. But it's like what he believes in of keeping maybe things a bit simple and really being customer obsessed. And it shows in terms of what he produces, right? That it works that way. So it would be about asking him, especially in terms of what you're talking about data and all that, how much really genuinely, because they are sitting on a lot of data and he must be having all aspects around and all that. But to say, when does he actually override everything else and go on a gut feel? It doesn't mean he doesn't consider what is being said, but how much does a person like that? Because in retrospect, and if yet, people always will tell you about how there was a logical thing to be doing that, but it's like someone like that is like in terms of marketing, because he's one of the greatest marketeers, right? It's like, but how, when, and in what situations, and when did you do something that actually work against what all the research and the data was saying?
Wow, that's a fascinating question. We'll share that question, and hopefully Jeff Bezos answers that one. Ivan, thank you so much for making the time. There was a lot, I think, to take away from this conversation, but I think what I'm taking are those 3 key points that you've mentioned from BrandZ: salient, meaningful, and different. Thank you for making the time to talk to us.
It's been good, and good luck with your shopping of your fancy wheels.
No, never. Thank you for listening to The Lead Creative. Did you get one insight that's worth sharing from this episode? Please share it with your network or your friends. Pop me some of your ideas and innovative finds on Twitter on @Mongezi. This podcast is available on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also find me on mongezi.com.